Monday, October 18, 2021 at 6 p.m. Can we do a roll call, please?
Commissioner Garrison.
Present.
Commissioner DeSisto. Commissioner Kling. Present. Commissioner Romero. Present. Commissioner Shreve.
Present.
Vice Chairwoman Maston.
Present.
Chairman Williams.
All right. And has everyone had a chance to look at the minutes? Does anyone have any corrections or changes from the previous meeting? All right. Motion to approve the minutes from the previous meeting?
Move to approve.
Second.
Everyone say aye. Aye. So I'd like to introduce really briefly, we have a new commission member. This is Todd Shreve. Todd, if you could just say a few words about yourself. Yes, and you have to press the button.
Vice Chairman Matson, thank you for welcoming me. I've been a community resident for almost 30 years. I lived in Sedona for about 25 years. Moved to Cottonwood 2 years ago. Own a small business here and a construction company. And I'm very happy to be involved with helping to make Cottonwood a better city. Thank you.
Very good. Just a quick reminder for anyone in the audience, if you would like to speak to something that is not on the agenda, please fill out a form. There are forms in the back, and then bring it up to the front, and we will take a look at that. And at this point, I'm going to see if we have any informational reports or updates.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Good evening, Commission. Just a couple things here. Like to let the Commission know that the clubhouse renovations that were completed last couple of years were submitted for this year's Historic Preservation Conference for a Governor's Award, and it was selected to receive that award. So next Friday, Jim and I will be down in Phoenix at the HPC conference to accept that on behalf of the city.
That's excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. The design guideline updates that the Commission saw last month, I believe it was September, and recommended approval to Council will be going for the first reading tomorrow. Follow up with the second reading if Council's okay with it, the first meeting of November. Walking on Main is a yearly event scheduled for Saturday, November 13th. We're also going to be doing our historic home tour. That day it's going to be a virtual home tour, but we'll be set up in the clubhouse for various other things with that. And then I want to remind the Commission of a joint meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission on Monday, next Monday, October 25th at 6 o'clock. That will be held at the Rec Center. So hopefully you can all make it so we can have a joint meeting with the Historic Preservation Commission. And that's all I have.
Great. And with that, I'm going to open the call to the public. So if anybody is here to speak on something that's not on the agenda, now is the time to fill out that form and come forward. It looks like there is no one who wants to come forward for the call to the public, so we are going to close that. I see that we don't have any old business, so we are on to new business. We're starting with item 1 is the conditional use permit 21-007 for the 6th Street Lofts.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gary Davis with Community Development. This is a request for conditional use permit for 2 items. One is the multifamily use in the C1 zone. C1 requires a conditional use permit for multifamily uses, at least for the time being. That will change very soon. And the second conditional use item is for going to a 3-story height rather than 2.5 stories. This is also a design review, DR 21008, I believe, and that's to review the design of the proposed multifamily development. Project details, it's in a C1 zone. Conditional use permit is required. Request is also made for 3 stories and up to 45 feet in height. The site is 3.1 acres in size. Proposal is for 56 units, which is about 18 units per acre. 35 of those units would be one bedroom, 15 would be two bedroom units, and 6 of them would be three bedroom, according to the applicant's materials. Location is just south of Mingus Avenue between 6th and 7th, just across the street from the county complex and just a little bit north of the library and the recreation center on 6th Street. Surrounding it on the south and the east is R3 zoning and some C1, which is also multifamily at this time. To the west of that is the county complex and city library, which is somehow still zoned R1. And to the north of that is C1, which is professional offices and restaurant. Site plan shows access from both 6th Street and 7th Street going through a loop parking and driveway area with buildings in the middle and on the ends. To the northeast is a retention basin, which is the lowest point on the site. This shows it a little bit better. The northeast shows a little more vegetation, and you see that would be the retention area. And in the center of the parcel, there would be a courtyard and pool area between the buildings. The site plan shows sufficient parking for the number of units planned. A leasing office would be located just to the south of the pool towards the southwest corner of the property. This is an oblique drawing of how the apartments would look in relation to the massing of the buildings surrounding. You can see to the very south, the lower portion is the existing apartments, and to the east also some multi-story apartments over there as well. This is looking east from the 6th Street side. Again, you see the existing apartments on the right, and in the distance behind these apartments over on 7th Street. And this is looking back the opposite direction from 7th Street. You see the open area in the foreground would be the retention area. The applicant provided a number of elevations that were in your packet you could look over, and it shows the planned materials and colors: white, light brown, and greens mainly, with some grays. A few perspective shots inside the complex. This would be the courtyard in the middle and the pool area. And this is the perspective from 6th Street, and that's the proposed view, and this is the current view right now. It lines up with the driveway that goes between the county building and the library. This is looking straight east across 6th Street. You can see the apartments to the right. And this is looking north from the same location. You see the county complex on the left and some of the commercial buildings, the offices to the north of this property, which is on the right side of the sidewalk here. This is looking the opposite direction, south on 6th. The property is to the west of the fire hydrant there, and the driveway would come in just beyond that in one of those shaded areas by the trees. And this is looking at the multi-story apartments that already exist to the very south, on the south edge of the property. This is looking southeast into the property. You can see those apartments directly to the south, and also in the distance, the existing apartments over on 7th Street. And then on 7th Street, here's a closer view of those apartments on the left, and on the right is the proposed property. This is looking south, and this is looking the opposite direction, looking north towards the offices and towards Mingus Avenue. Staff's proposed stipulations are fairly standard. The project should be developed in conformance with the site plan and the letter of intent that was submitted for this meeting. That the parking for the project shall be provided in accordance with our Section 406 parking. Project shall comply with Code Review Board comments that are dated August 24th, and those are in your packet for your reference. Project shall be developed in conformance with the Section 407 landscaping requirements, and certificate of zoning compliance documenting completion of the conditions needs to be issued within 24 months from the date of this approval. Number 6, the City of Cottonwood reserves the right to revoke the conditional use permit if it creates problems. This is a standard condition that we generally recommend on all conditional use permits. In this case, the applicant has indicated that they might ask that that be removed. In that case, that is not a problem with staff, because that's a condition that is geared toward a more specific use, like, for example, a drive-through window at a coffee house or something that could create problems for neighborhoods, stacking and noise and things. This is for the apartment use and for the height. Once those are established, it's very unlikely that there would be a need or an ability to revoke it. So if the commission so chooses to remove that, whoever makes a motion on this could just simply omit number 6. Number 7, right now the property is in 2 parcels. Those will need to be combined prior to getting building permits. And a 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk is required by Public Works along the west side of 7th Street. There's already a sidewalk on 6th Street. And no building shall exceed 3 stories and 45 feet in height. That concludes staff's presentation. We did receive 2 written comments by email, and those we've distributed to the commission in advance of the meeting tonight. One by Margot Money and one by Logan Kitchen. Those are the only 2 written comments that staff has received. Otherwise, this project meets the requirements from staff's view for the findings that the Planning Commission is required by the code to find in approving a conditional use permit. So with that, I can answer any questions you might have. We do have a representative of the applicant here in the audience as well.
Do any of the commissioners have questions for the staff? Commissioner Garrison?
Yeah, I got a couple. One, is there any reclaimed water in this area?
I don't have the answer to that.
No. Is there any plans to have reclaimed water in the area anytime in the near future? Okay. Number 2 is your pictures show, and I drive down 7th quite often, and your pictures actually show people parked there, and that's overflow from the apartments?
From the apartment on the other side, yes.
And your entrance is pretty much right where you're standing, taking that picture from the way I looked at the map?
It would be a little south of
A little more south. That side stays clogged quite a bit with excess people from the apartments, and I'm wondering if there's going to be any provisions made for no parking on that street as a condition of this construction, because that street is not excessively wide, and you're going to have a large amount of traffic, especially if the 6th Street is a right in, right out.
I believe this section of the street, Commissioner Garrison, is already signed for no parking on the east side, the west side. This is the other side of a no parking sign, I believe. So parking is prohibited on one side of the street currently.
Yeah, but you also have the fire department right to the south of this. It's quite often that you can't drive through there easily when there's traffic coming from the other direction, because the street really isn't that wide, and you're going to be increasing the traffic significantly in that area. So I'm just asking, I guess, if the staff or anybody has looked at the possibility of closing off parking on that entire section of street, at least where it fronts this property.
We can look at that if it's not prohibited already. I think that sign might apply to the whole street, but we'll double check on that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kling? Commissioner Romeo? Commissioner Shreve?
I did have, excuse me, one question. I visited the site today, and because I'm in the construction business, I had a question about the finished floor of the project. I couldn't really derive that from the drawings, and by looking at it, it looks like the buildings are very close to the street. And will the property be sloped from the 6th Street to the 7th Street, or are they going to bring all of that grade down to one continuous finished floor? And if so, are they going to, the distance between the building and the sidewalk is really short. Is there a retaining wall or some sort of, it couldn't be more than 3 feet because they would require a fence or a railing, but can you answer that question?
I think we have the applicant who might be able to better answer that on the details.
Right. Are there any further questions for the city? All right, I'll let you go, and we'd love to speak with the applicant. Could you state your name and title for the record, please?
Good evening. Okay. Madam Vice Chair, Maston, and members of the Commission, I'm Caroline Lobo with Soul Architects out of Phoenix, Arizona. We are very excited to present to you or answer your questions, any of your questions that you may have. Commissioner Shreve, is that correct? Thank you for your question. We are intending to maintain the grades that we've got on site. So the site does slope from 6th Street all the way to 7th Street. We've got the elevations shown, the finished grade elevations shown on the drawing. And that's sheet 2136, 2 of 3 of the civil, which shows the finished floor elevation of 3401.
I'm sorry, is that A201 I'm looking at?
No, you're looking at sheet 2 of 3 of the civil drawings. It's a grading and drainage plan. Have these?
Do we have that?
No, I don't believe we put the civil
Okay.
drawings in. We just put the architectural drawings for the
Got it.
design review in.
I can give you a copy right now.
Hence my
you.
question.
That's a great question. So yeah, we very respectfully have designed the site to honor the existing grades, and we retained the existing, we're within the required setback from the street without requiring us to provide any additional retaining walls. So I'm going to just hand this over to you for you to look
Go
at.
ahead. Yeah. While he's taking a look at that, I was told you might bring some examples of some of the materials that you are planning.
If I may, Madam Vice Chair, we've got two things. We will give you a color board with the sample of the stucco colors, and that might vary a little bit. We want to bring in more of the, we're really inspired by the Verde River and the riparian habitat, and you want to add more of that, the colors into the palette. But we've also got a video of what this might look like. If you don't mind us playing that for you, would be great. So we will do that right now while I get you the color board.
Okay. Point this at the camera a little bit. And pass that down. Oh, there's a spider. Okay.
Did we bring you some dust from Phoenix?
You brought a spider friend with us.
Oh, spider! Oh,
Not anymore. Okay. Here. All right.
Looks like it does show a retaining wall fence where you're talking about.
Well, just, they've got the,
Well,
it also just swooped by it.
You're looking at the.
Those three buildings. Those three front buildings are the tallest buildings, right? The ones in the front of the 3 stories? So in my mind, I thought if you were to sink them down,
Oh, I see what you're doing.
you will address this height issue, because we do have someone that has pointed out that they don't agree with the conditional use permit for the height. So a possible solution would be to lower the grade of the building, create a retaining wall there, and then those 3 buildings won't appear to be so high right up against the side of the road.
Excuse me, Commissioner Shreve, I just want to take a quick moment and remind everybody to turn off their phones for the duration of the meeting. Sorry about that.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense. You know, I will review that with the owner and figure out what's the best strategy. Because the way the whole site was designed to, you know, obviously not to add. Oh, I am so sorry. Thank you. So I will review those comments with the owner and figure out the best strategy to move forward. I mean, our goal was to design the site in a way that, you know, we want to respect the existing grades, but I do understand your point about the 3-story building.
I think that photo there shows it well, that those buildings are close to the road and they're at road grade. And right now, the natural grade is about 3 feet below the road already. So is that a retaining wall against the building, right up against the building there?
No, that's just a fence.
There's no way they're going to do that without the retaining wall.
Yeah.
I think it would be positive to have the whole complex one level, not step down. That's all.
Yeah. Commissioner Romeo, do you have any questions for the applicant?
No, it's fine.
Commissioner Kling, do you have any questions for the applicant?
Just for today. Have you done any traffic studies on similar developments like this as far as inflow, outflow? I'm just a little bit worried about, we do have Mingus being expanded, so it's just hard to gauge how much we're going to have pouring onto that once this is done, hypothetically. We have schools right there.
Do we have a traffic study done? No. Yeah, we don't have one done at this time. So.
And then Commissioner Garrison, did you have any questions for the applicant?
Are we looking at this strictly as a conditional use, or are we talking design review also at this point?
It's both.
So I like that you added green. I think this color palette, at least in the photos we've been given, is really fairly sanitary. So the green would really liven things up. I'm a little concerned about the amount of grass you're showing. I like grass, but it takes a lot of water. That's why I asked about the reclaimed water. And I really like what you did with the stepping up of the buildings. I think bringing the single and double stories at your entrances and then having them move up is really kind of a nice trick to help soften the look of those 3 stories, because they are going to stand out quite a bit. And obviously it stands out against what would be kind of our industrial users, which is the library and the county building and that open space there. So that kind of helps. And then, you know, it drops down significantly by the time it gets over to 7th Street and the lower units. So I think your design was great. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the project. The height, I was expecting to see more taller buildings. I was surprised you can get that many rooms in there without having half of it 3-story. But overall, I think you guys did a good design. But I think Commissioner Shreve is right. I think you're going to have a grade problem right there off of 6th Street. But you know, you'll deal with that when you're on site, I guess.
So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on Commissioner Garrison's comments. The main thing that stands out to me with this project is how well situated it is on the site in terms of the way that you have loaded the taller buildings near the library and the rec center, which are taller buildings. So they feel more natural, and it allows the project to become increasingly residential feeling as it goes towards the other entrance. I do agree with Commissioner Shreve that you will probably want to look into grading the site. And I also think that considering that the height is something that's come up from the community, that it would probably be in your best interest in terms of keeping the community happy and in the feeling of Cottonwood, which is a small town feel, to just go ahead and recapture those couple of feet that you have on the grade. And besides that, I think that my commissioners covered most of the key questions. This project, especially, we haven't focused at all in this meeting on your Central Park sort of element, but this project is a really wonderful, walkable, human scale type, more dense housing. It's exactly what Cottonwood needs. We have discussed at great length here on the Planning and Zoning Commission about how much Cottonwood needs more housing, and this helps mitigate that need. So that's my opinion as the vice chair. And with that, I am going to ask if anyone would like to make a motion.
If you,
Oh,
could I
sorry,
say a
go
few
ahead.
comments? So Vice Chair Maston, thank you for your comments. Commissioners, thank you for your comments as well. You know, we did look at your strategic plan, and we're very impressed with the idea of creating a sustainable community, walkable community. And so those were the parameters that, you know, drove us to design something that works with the existing landscape. And although we are asking for a height variation of 45 feet, we are well within the 35 feet. But, you know, knowing the fact that we need to add some mechanical units, et cetera, we might go slightly over that. So we're very respectful of what we're trying to do in terms of integrating into the adjoining Cottonwood community. So with that, respect all your comments, and we will take into account everything that you've shared with us today. So thank you.
Vice Chair Maston, before you do make a motion or call for a motion, did you want to open the floor to the public?
Oh, yes, I do. I do want to open the floor to the public.
I was just going to mention that before we do
Thank you.
call the public, Madam Vice Chair. Just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Our Section 407 landscaping standards, it encourages xeriscaping, doesn't absolutely require it in all cases, but I think both the ordinance and staff would certainly encourage xeriscaping whenever possible here, especially around the edges, not necessarily in the park
In the
area
center.
in the middle. Right, right. As far as the height goes, if the grade is changed on that front row, that would change the height of the building in relation to 6th Street, but it wouldn't change the height as far as our building code is concerned. We would still measure it from the grade wherever that grade is. So
they'd still need the CUP.
they'd still, right,
Yeah.
it wouldn't change the need for the 45 feet, but it could change it in relation to the street.
Okay. And now I'll open for public comment. No takers? Okay.
We did get a couple email
Yeah.
comments. I do believe you have those.
Yeah, we do have those. Should I read them on the record?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So we received one email from a Logan Kitchen, and it's titled New Housing on 6th Street, and it reads, I live on East Aspen Street between Willard and Mingus. I am in support of the new housing development proposal. This could bring more young families into the area and bring more involvement to the rec center, park, and library. Old Town would see increased community involvement as well. As long as measures are taken to support this traffic, it will be great to expand the community here, especially with family homes being so expensive. New development has been really improving this area of Cottonwood. However, with the risk of sounding insensitive to impoverished communities, I do not think that low-income housing in this area is a good idea. To be frank, the area of Cottonwood north of 89A between Willard and Maine has historically been a more crime-filled and rundown area of Cottonwood. It has been improving bit by bit with sidewalks and streetlights, as well as new businesses and housing. I hope this will be an improvement and not something that will bring increased crime, substance abuse, or domestic issues. And then the second email is from Margot Money, and it is titled Development Project. It reads, in regards to the project below, the Commission plans to review a request for a conditional use permit for a 56-unit multifamily development and a building height of 3 stories and up to 45 feet at 75 South 6th Street between 6th and 7th Streets and approximately 300 feet south of Mingus Avenue. I think housing for families is essential, and this is a good start if the housing is affordable for locals and not to bring in more out-of-state entitled people. Affordable for locals is a rent of no more than $900 a month. However, making units 3 stories high continues to impede on the surrounding view, and I object to that. And now those are on the record.
I'll make a motion.
Do we have a second? Or, so,
Well,
go ahead.
can I make it?
Yes, you may.
Okay. I move to approve the CUP 21-007 and DR 21-008 to allow the construction of a 56-unit multifamily development at 75 South 6th Street, subject to the following stipulations. The project shall be developed in conformance with the site plan and letter of intent submitted with this application reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 18th, 2021. Parking for the project, including bicycle parking, shall be provided in conformance with zoning ordinance section 406 parking and loading requirements. The project shall comply with code review board requirements dated August 24, 2021. The project shall be developed in conformance with zoning ordinance section 407 landscape requirements. A certificate of zoning compliance documenting the completion of conditions shall be issued within 24 months from the date of this approval. The 2 parcels shall be combined into one prior to application for building permits. A 5-foot wide concrete sidewalk shall be installed along the west side of 7th Street, directly adjacent to the development prior to issuance of certificate of occupancy. No building shall exceed 3 stories and 45 feet in height. And I would like to add a 10th that it seemed that the voice of the commission was that the applicant and contractor look at bringing the grade adjacent to 6th Street down to try and capture some of that height and make it more
Yes.
visually appealing to the community. That's the only other stipulation I thought we
Yes.
had agreed on. And you asked for dropping of 6.
If the commission desires.
Thank you.
I'll second that motion.
It has been moved by Commissioner Garrison and seconded by Commissioner Romeo. All those in favor, roll call vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Motion approved.
We do need a roll call vote.
Oh, you have to do it.
Commissioner Garrison,
Aye.
Commissioner DeSisto, sorry, he's not here. Commissioner Kling, Commissioner Romeo,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Maston,
Aye.
Commissioner
Shreve.
Sorry.
Aye.
Hey, I remembered something.
The only other comment I'd make to the applicant, even though we've already approved this, is where you do the bike parking, if you can put like a little bike repair area. Having lived in apartments before, hauling my bike up and down stairs to like repair it in my house is just not fun. So that's all.
Very good. So with that, we move on to item number 2. Project number DR 21-009, Unisource Energy Services.
Thank you, Vice Chair Maston, members of the Commission, Jim Paget, Community Development Planner. So what we are looking at this evening is a request for design review approval from Unisource Energy Services for a new service center. Maybe. Oh. You know, maybe it would help if I grabbed the wrong one. I don't know whether there's two here. Okay,
Cursed meeting.
here we go. Back on track. So the location is between 12th Street and Main, the bypass road, 89A and Cherry Street. It's accessed from the north, from Cherry Street, with a little extension of 14th, South 14th Street. It's a 5.75 acre parcel, and currently it's zoned C2, and all of the surrounding properties around it are also zoned C2. As I said, property is 5.75 acres. The project will consist of a 5,900 square foot service building, 7,000 square foot warehouse area, and a 3,000 square foot covered storage building, and then open yard storage areas for vehicle and equipment. The building is going to be constructed of masonry block with some metal architectural trims and a metal seam roof. The colors that they've chosen is sort of earth tones with some grays and red. Go back one. The majority of the landscaping, as you see on the landscape plan that's attached in here, is adjacent to where the public would access the site on the north side of the property. The rear areas will be left open for their storage uses. There is a natural drainage wash that takes a good portion of the southern side of the property, also acts as a good buffer from the areas where they have storage and equipment. They're proposing an 8-foot chain link fence around the site, both for security and for screening. It would be slatted. Planning Commission does have the authority when you approve to go up to an 8-foot fence. Standard code is 6 feet when 8 feet is requested for specific reasons, and in this case for the security and the screening. Staff is recommending approval on that. A bit dark for the picture there, but that is looking south. You can see this is from 14th Street. One of the requirements from engineering is that curb gutter and sidewalk be improved along 14th Street on the west side of the property. The site plan, as you can see, the top of that there is where it would be coming down from 14th Street from Cherry, entering the main public access with parking available in this northern portion. The main office building, the warehouse coming off down the end with the covered storage. These other areas would be open storage for equipment and vehicles. Just a little bit of a blown up of that same diagram. This is the architectural perspective of what the the site would look like. This is the north side as you would enter from 14th Street. This is what you would see, first of all, with the offices here, warehouse building, and covered storage. These are the colors. And on the
nice.
landscape plan, you can see most of the landscape is on the north side of the site where it'd be visible as you enter the site. There's also a natural vegetation that would be left along the south where the wash is, and some along the east side of the property. Some of the elevations that have been provided, in this case, the north and the south elevation, east and west. So here's the 14th Street access. You can see the east side of the street is already improved with curb gutter, and the west side would be provided with a curb gutter and sidewalk required from engineering. Properties to the north, there are some automotive uses, a couple office buildings. This site faces the rear of all the adjacent properties. View to the south, you can see over here is the Ace Hardware and buildings along Main Street. Looking off to the east, and you just sort of see the roofs of some of these buildings. These are the ones facing Main Street. Also looking to the east. Must have been a cloudy day this day. This is the rear of the Motor Vehicle Department building, which is just to the west. So that concludes my comments. We also do have a representative from Unisource here this evening. If there's any questions, I have to pass on to him.
I'm going to check and see if any of my commissioners have questions. Commissioner Garrison, do you have a question for staff?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the plot plan, and I'm questioning the need for the sidewalk. Not only approaching from Cherry down to this location, but also the sidewalks that run up and down the property front. This isn't a typical walking, this isn't retail, this isn't a storefront, this isn't a typical public venue. People that are going to be coming to this site are going to be coming for meetings and to deal with construction issues, not to pay bills or any of that. So I'm really wondering why we're making them put a sidewalk all the way down when the county right next door doesn't have any sidewalks that run down it. And then we got a sidewalk that runs all the way across the front of the property. It just seems like we should be getting away from using concrete, when we could landscape that, and it would be much more appealing when it's all said and done than having a sidewalk out there and adding the expense. So I'm just questioning why we're doing a sidewalk.
Okay. I would have to go back to the engineering department for more clarification on that.
Engineering standards require, under certain instances, that sidewalks be installed. It does come from the city's senior engineer on that requirement. I do believe, though, that the applicant can have a discussion with him, possibly request from council to have that waived, but that's not a comment that this staff really has much to do with. It does come from engineering at the code review level.
And if I can add, I also believe that you never know when a project's going up if it will always be there. Like, buildings change hands. Obviously, we want this project to succeed, or whatever goes in there to succeed and to stay there for a little while. But I feel like anytime we have the opportunity to have an applicant help us create a more generally usable built space, I understand what you're saying about the landscaping, for sure, but I also think that sidewalks offer usability and accessibility for a more general set of programs in the future. It's more future-proof.
And if I could address the on-site requirement for the sidewalks or what's shown on the plans. Actually, that area parallel running along the north property line, that's a landscape area, not a sidewalk. Looking at the two, it does look like on the site plan, it's hard surface. In the landscape plan, that is their landscape area. So there's really only minimal sidewalk areas just directly in front of the building, close to the parking spaces.
No, I think this is going to be a great addition to that area. This area has been, forever, it's been just this hole that hasn't been able to be filled. And every time you think there was something coming forward that would create a usable, something usable for that area, it just never worked out. I know that was originally designed to be this whole little industrial cluster, and it just never worked out. And so I think it's a perfect move. To the Vice Chair's comment, they stayed at their last location about 20 years. So, I don't expect them to move very fast, but to her comment also, it's never a bad thing to look to the future. I just, I always question the need to put in things that are just unusable or not necessary if we don't have to at this time. So I think it's a great addition. I think it's going to be a good neighbor for all those surrounding it. I like their use of their space, and it brings something back into the city that will take and open another building up in a much more industrial area for them. So that was it. Thank you.
Commissioner Kling, questions for staff? Commissioner Romeo? Commissioner Shreve, do you have any questions for staff?
Is there any plans at night? Is that area going to be dark sky lit for safety? Because it's such an island in the middle of a bunch of other C1 and C2, is there going to be any kind of lighting in that parking lot in the evening?
I think they have their light plan, actually. Yeah, in here.
They will have to comply with the dark sky ordinance.
But that, oh my goodness, sorry.
Yes, they will.
Yes, they will. I believe the way that they're handling that based on the light plan that I have in front of me is a lot of downlighting. It is DR11, so it's towards the back. It's like the last one or two, second to last.
Madam Vice Chair, Commissioner Shreve, the amount of lighting is based on the size of the property by code. So they do, like Jim said, they do have to meet dark sky requirements. We do have a thorough review process to ensure that they are in compliance. They're allowed so many lumens per acre, so many lumens of unshielded versus shielded. So all of that gets reviewed at time of building permit submittal. Obviously, you see some of it in front of you. We do ask for it now just to get an idea of what it's going to look like. But regardless of what they're trying to do, they will have to meet dark sky requirements.
I mean, I think the 8-foot fencing will probably help with the security of it quite a bit. Yeah, especially given that so much of that fencing backs up to that wash, so you have to you'd have to pole vault over it. All right, are there any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to speak to the commission? Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Duncan Jakes. I'm the district manager for Unisource Energy Services based here in Cottonwood. And I just want to thank you for looking at this application and the staff's review. I'm really personally excited about this new building. We've kind of outgrown our current space, and as you mentioned earlier, the costs of everything are going up, and space in town is limited, and we're lucky enough to find this property instead of being forced to relocate outside of town. So we're really excited about staying in the city of Cottonwood, and I think it's going to be a simple but beautiful building, and as you mentioned, also just a great use of that space, and it'll be able to service our 22,000 plus customers in the Verde Valley for decades to come. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Very good. And Commissioner, hang on. Do any of the commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Garrison?
No, ma'am.
Commissioner Kling? Commissioner Romeo? Commissioner Shreve? Well, I don't have any questions for you either, so I brought you back for nothing. So sorry.
Okay. Thanks again.
So my comments on this are, I actually just agree with the applicant. Right now, this particular property is a little bit of a wasteland. So it's a wonderful use of the space. It is pretty much the perfect level of industrial, and as these types of buildings go, it is attractive. I know that we saw that extremely helpful color slide, but the earth tones are they're a good use. It'll look good in the landscape, and I do appreciate very much that you guys are landscaping the area where people will be seeing the property and interacting with the property. Any further comments from the commission? All right. With that said, would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll move to approve DR 21-009 for Unisource Energy Services to operate a public utility service center and administration building at 521 South 14th Street, subject to the following stipulations. 1, the project shall be developed in conformance with the site plan submitted with this application and reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 18th, 2021. 2, the project shall comply with Code Review Board requirements dated February 10th, 2021. 3, the parking for this project shall be provided in conformance with Zoning Ordinance Section 406 parking and loading requirements. 4, curb, gutter, and sidewalk improvements shall be installed per city standards along the west side of 14th Street from Cherry Street to the northern boundary of the subject site prior to the issuance of certificate of occupancy. And 5, a certificate of zoning compliance documentation documenting the completion of conditions shall be issued within 24 months from the date of this approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Commissioner Garrison, Commissioner Romeo makes a motion, Commissioner Garrison seconds. Can we get a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Garrison?
Aye.
Commissioner Kling?
Aye.
Commissioner Romeo?
Aye.
Commissioner Shreve? Aye. Vice Chairwoman Maston?
Aye. Motion passes. And now we are on to the third item. This is project number conditional use permit 21-005, Mesquite Hills Special Directional Sign.
Thank you, Vice Chair Maston. As you stated, this is a conditional use permit request for a sign from Miramani Homes, who is a new developer of the Mesquite Hills subdivision. Sign location, and sort of easy to identify. This was, what is there now was approved a little over 5 years ago by the previous developer. The approval at that time that it was given was for 5 years, which has just expired. They did obtain the permission from the current property owner to extend their lease for longer. So the location where the sign is out there, the base remains exactly the same. The zoning there is C1, light commercial. And the height of the sign is 10 feet. It's a maximum of 40 square feet of text in the area. One special directional sign is allowed per subdivision with a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission. And it does require in there that the approval, should they get the approval, be good for a specific period of time. And that's where the previous commission did give the 5 years.
Yeah, they ran out of their time.
So you can see this is where the sign is. The stone brick column base will remain. The site has sort of been cleared a little bit. Property to the south across 89. And looking east on 89A and looking west on 89A. And you can see the sign as it presently exists in its form. So that's all my comments.
About the sign. Do any of my commissioners have any questions about the sign? Commissioner Garrison?
What's the projected build-out of Mesquite Hills?
They're in the process of moving on to their next phase. We're wrapping up the final plat, getting ready to take it to city council next month. About 200 something more units in the next phase 2 and 3. Total build out, I don't have that number exactly. I think it's in the 300s, maybe 400.
Time-wise?
Oh, time-wise, it's hard to say. It's really based on the market. I know they have over 200 more homes in the next couple phases that they'd like to build out. But as far as their timeline goes, I'm not sure what that would look like.
Is there any expectation that the sign goes away when they finish their build-out?
Absolutely. The approval would be only for a 5-year period. If build-out happens before that, they would have to remove it. If not, they'd come back and ask for a renewal on that.
So I don't see anything about removing it. Can we make it a condition of the renewal?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And for the record, I completely approve of that. I think that that is a good idea. All right, moving on. Commissioner Kling, Commissioner Romeo, Commissioner Shreve. My comment on this is that, you know, it's a monument sign. It's pretty straightforward. It's not the most beautiful monument sign, but it gets the job done. And as long as it goes away at the end of its time, I think we're all good with it. Is the applicant here? Would they like to say anything?
Thank you. I didn't want to take any chances on this.
Yeah.
So,
Please introduce yourself for the record.
my name's John Angelini. I'm the VP of Sales for Miramonte Homes, Northern Arizona. Now, I do agree, we will take the sign down once it's done. We're hoping it's less than a 5-year build-out. We have 271 home sites that we're going to develop. I'm not sure about the monument itself.
The brick.
Right, the concrete part. Does that need to be removed also?
Well, what would you be using it for? Would you?
Well, the sign goes into that monument. We're just replacing the sign itself, not the monument.
Did you put the monument up in the first place?
No,
Or
no.
the previous developer?
No, I think the previous developer did.
The previous developer did?
So I'm not sure how
So
we would-
what would be right there on that property?
That's hospital land.
Right.
And I would,
Correct.
in my mind, that belongs to Mesquite Hills, one way or the other, so.
In terms of its removal? Yeah.
Yeah. I do think that it is only right that, I realize that you guys are inheriting this, but it is your property now, and it's, if you did want to keep that, you'd have to integrate it into something that is more attractive for the community, which would probably instigate a new conditional use permit. So we will just run on the assumption that, given no further plans, that this conditional use permit, at the end of it, the sign would have to be completely taken down,
Okay.
including the monument.
No problem.
And if, in the meantime, in the next 5 years, you come up with a clever idea for those
Okay. Put a
concrete
swing.
pillars, you know.
Yep. No problem. Thank you.
Do any of the commissioners have any further questions for the applicant? All right. With that, are there any comments? All right. Would someone like to make a motion?
I don't have a problem making the motion. Do we need to specifically put in there that the monument and the sign needs to be removed at completion? Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, you need to add it.
All right, I move to approve CUP 21-005 to allow the placement of a special directional sign at 586 West State Route 89A, subject to the following stipulations. The project shall be developed in conformance with the site plan submitted with this application and reviewed by the Planning and Zoning Commission on October 18th, 2021. The special directional sign is granted for a period of 5 years from the date of Planning and Zoning Commission approval, or a time as specified by the Planning Commission, which is 5 years. A sign permit shall be applied for within 30 days from the date of approval by the Planning and Zoning Commission, or the conditional use permit shall be subject to revocation procedures. The special directional sign shall comply with all requirements of Section 405.G.9 of the City of Cottonwood zoning code. The City of Cottonwood reserves the right to revoke the conditional use permit if the use creates an remedial public safety problem as determined by the city, and the sign and monument would need to be removed at the completion of the fully built out of the site, the plan. You know.
Can I get a second?
Go ahead.
A second.
All right, can we take a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Garrison?
Aye.
Commissioner Kling?
Aye.
Commissioner Romeo?
Aye.
Commissioner Shreve?
Aye.
Vice Chairwoman Maston?
Aye. You got a sign.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And now we have 2 discussion items. Mr. Davis?
Madam Vice Chair, I'll go ahead and start with the first one. We don't have anybody here representing this project, so if the commission would like, I can just give you a brief rundown, or we can postpone it and see if we can get somebody here in November.
Why don't we postpone it then so we can actually get the, you could give us a very brief summary, but I think we're going to want to talk to someone from the project.
So they're looking at a couple properties on the east side of Main Street between Birch and Beach. It's in an area currently zoned AR20. It is surrounded by a couple properties that are zoned R2, which is multifamily. They want to come in and put in some more multifamily. So it's not quite out of place there, but because it is on currently zoned AR20, it is considered very low density residential, so it would also require a general plan amendment. It's hard to say what, if any, neighborhood or neighbors would say anything about it. Again, this area is kind of mixed right now. You got some higher density residential and some very low density residential mixed in there. So they just wanted to get an idea of the commission's opinion on it before they actually spend the time and money moving forward to come to the commission. It would have to come here for approval. They'd have to do a rezone, also have to go to city council for that as well, and a general plan amendment. So that's basically what they're looking for, is just opinion feedback from the commission, but we can postpone that discussion until November and see if we can get somebody here at that time.
Yeah, well, if any of my commissioners have feelings just based on the, what you can see right now, I can say for myself, I always feel like projects like this are highly dependent upon the actual, I realize that this applicant won't have this yet, but the site plan to a degree, because how it fits in with the surrounding uses is almost entirely dependent on the site. Like, we just saw a high density housing project at the beginning of this meeting where the way that it was set up on its site makes it much more amenable to the surrounding area, even though it's relatively higher density. And I feel like this site could be a similar scenario where you have something that's just well designed so it fits in, but it's very dependent upon that. So I guess I'd pass that on to the applicant and have at least an idea of how the use or the program's going to be distributed on the site.
Is there additional AR20 other than that one piece? What else is AR20? All that green?
It kind of leapfrogs a little bit. I believe to the north, you've got a little bit of the R2 directly adjacent. To the east, directly adjacent R2, and then further east, you have AR20. In between that red box and the pink area, which is C1, there is AR20 properties there as well. One thing to note too is that in this area, some of the AR20 properties don't meet current development standards on parcel size. For whatever reason, when this zoning was applied to it, or historical lot splits resulted in what today would be undersized lots for that zone.
Did the R2 come from the A20? In other words, was that R2 originally A20 and then that was changed years ago to build that housing? Or this was the way it was originally?
Vice Chair Masson and Commissioner Shreve, we'd have to go back and look through our records, but it is likely that that was the case.
It really looks like it.
It is likely that that was the case.
Commissioner Garrison, I see your hand on the button.
Yeah, so currently this property has a trailer on it, right? A double wide up front.
There's
And-
actually 2 properties there that they would have to combine, and they
Right.
had indicated that they would be removing the existing structures.
And you've got the condos or the apartments right to the left, the east or west, I guess, of this property. Then you've got the multifamily further down on Birch. I guess right off the top of my head, my biggest concern is that whole area is kind of downtrodden, I guess would be a way to put it. It's not specifically blight yet, but it's pretty dang close, and that sits back in, the section of the green right between it and what you're calling 7th Place, which is barely drivable. I don't think you could get a fire truck around that corner. That's all trailers as well, and hasn't really been kept up, and it's barely a passable road. Have they given you any indication of whether they're looking at multi-level, or would this be something that would be consistent with the apartment complex down the street, to the east?
Commissioner Garrison, I don't have all the details. It was just a brief meeting. I do believe they would go at least 2 stories, though.
Okay, I'm going to have to, follow the lead by the vice chair. I think, a lot of the way I would feel about this would be, what they come forward with as far as design. It's kind of tucked in, but what it's surrounded by really doesn't lend itself to high-end housing. And I would be really worried about this just becoming another tract of houses that wouldn't also be, kept up in the best of shape. So I really would love to see what their plans are. And I'm a little disappointed they didn't actually show up tonight. So anyway, maybe it's all for nothing.
Yeah, we'll get in touch with them and look at bringing this back for discussion in November.
All right, thank you very much. If there are no further comments on that, we have another discussion item, which is a zoning ordinance amendment. Or a series of amendments, actually.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gary Davis with Community Development. As you probably have realized over the last few years, we've been taking a good hard look at our zoning ordinance and trying to identify things that are an unnecessary obstruction to orderly development in the city without taking away the standards for development that we have, but taking a look at things that may not serve their purpose, that may have been intended, that were put in place many decades ago that are kind of a mystery to us now sometimes. But we've come through with a number of zoning ordinance amendments like that. We've put together one that really takes a good look at the multifamily zones, the R2, the R3, and the R4, looking at standards in those areas that we might consider some relief from, that could present some obstacles, unnecessary obstacles to development. Based on conversations we've had with people coming in over the counter over the last several years, saying, well, you can do this, but the ordinance says you got to have this over here, and then that's kind of a deal breaker sometimes. So we're looking at getting rid of some of those deal breakers. So I've highlighted in bullet points basic descriptions of things that are in the section 407 through 414, et cetera, amendments that you also see in your packet. But just to go one by one here, the first one is where we have right now a required 10-foot landscaping yard in multifamily zones, but only if it's next to a single-family use, not a single-family zone, but a single-family use, even if the zoning is multifamily or commercial. If that use next door to them happens to be single-family, at least for now, then a 10-foot wide landscaping yard is required, where it wouldn't ordinarily be that wide. It would normally just be your regular 5 or 7 foot wide setback there. So we're proposing, instead of the 10-foot wide landscaping yard along that property line, allow for a solid 6-foot wall or fence to substitute for that distance. Another one is in R2. Right now, we have manufactured home as a conditional use. R2 is basically a duplex zone where it's not high density, multi-story apartments necessarily, but medium density. And we have very little call for manufactured homes. I don't know that we've ever received a request for a manufactured home conditional use permit in R2. So we're proposing to remove that so that vacant properties or redevelopable properties in R2 could be developed to multifamily instead of a single conditional use manufactured home. In the R2, R3, and R4, minimum lot area could be reduced from 7,500 square feet to 5,000 square feet. And the reason for this is, as we discussed the last few months with the design guidelines in the Old Town area, many of the lots in the older part of town are 50 feet wide. Very few of those lots are 7,500 square feet in size. And so even if somebody had two side-by-side 50-foot lots and they wanted to make one bigger, they couldn't, because they would, even the bigger lot, if it's under 7,500 square feet, that would not conform to the zoning code. Anytime you create a new lot, it has to be 7,500 square feet in these zones. And as I say, in the older parts of town, 7,500 square foot lots are pretty rare unless they've been combined long ago. Related to that, in R2, which is again basically the duplex zone, reduce the minimum lot area per dwelling unit from 3,750 to 2,500, and that would correspond with splitting a 5,000 square foot lot in half instead of a 7,500 square foot lot. Or not splitting it in half, but having one unit per 2,500 square feet. In the R3 and the R4, which are higher density, reduce the minimum lot area per dwelling unit from 3,000 square feet to 2,500 square feet for lots 10,000 square feet or smaller. Right now we have a sliding scale for lot area per dwelling unit in the R3 and R4, and under 10,000 square feet it requires 3,000. Again, with a very small lot, that becomes very difficult to develop to its full potential as multifamily. And also in the R3 and R4, allow rear yard setback to be measured from the center of an alley where an alley exists. This would make it consistent with a change we made in the R2 zone about a year ago that would allow you to measure from the center of the alley. And in the R2, R3, R4, and C1, where these multifamily would be allowed, CR and the I1, I2 zones change the maximum number of stories from 2.5 to 3 with written approval of the fire department. The 2.5-story requirement has been in place because of restrictions basically from fire department. We have limited equipment to be able to fight fires there. However, if the fire department can be assured that there is adequate fire suppression equipment in place, i.e. sprinklering in most cases, that is something that they could potentially give written approval to and not have to require people to come in for a conditional use permit to go from 2.5 stories to 3 stories.
Gary, let me add something to that, please.
Sure.
Along with that, Vice Chair Masson, Commission, part of what Gary was saying on the equipment, the fire department is on track to get a ladder truck, so that significantly helps their ability to fight fires in taller buildings. Every residential structure, regardless of how tall it is or how it's built, anything like that, is required to have sprinklers. So that also helps with that. Anything over a certain foot, I believe it's 40 or 45 feet, requires non-combustible materials as well. So we do have other safety provisions in there that going to 3 stories with fire department approval shouldn't be a huge concern.
And I would add to that, in the case of the apartment complex you saw earlier this evening, the 6th Street Lofts, in the code review comments that was a condition of your approval, the fire department required sprinklers in the attic spaces in those 3 stories as well. So that's an example of some of the mitigation measures they can put in place.
Also with that, a project like that, even though wouldn't necessarily need a conditional use permit, the conditional use permit was only for the height. Design review would still be required, and so it would still require coming to the commission for approval. It wouldn't make them exempt just because they don't have to get a conditional use permit for the height.
Good to know.
And the main difference in that is if design review is required, a developer can say, well, I can take my chance and change the design a little bit. But if a conditional use permit is required in order to have the multifamily use, in order to have the 3rd story, which may make or break the project, then there's a lot of uncertainty on the part of the developer. And this removes that element of uncertainty. Just bring it to the design review, however, does give the Planning Commission a chance to review it at least for design consideration. And in R3 and R4, exempt lots 5 acres or smaller from the requirement that 30% of the lot be provided as usable open space. Right now, we require in those zones that 30% of a lot be open, be landscaped, and that does not include parking. That means that almost a third of the lot has to be some sort of landscaping. In this case, on the 6th Street Lofts, a lot of that was their retention area and their area in the middle. But that does create some issues when you get smaller than 5 acres, and you may not have a piece of property that's as regularly shaped as the one that they had on the 6th Street. So that's potentially a barrier to development as well for infill development on often narrow or oddly shaped lots.
Are you going to replace that with some requirement, 10%, 15%, or are you going to completely eliminate that?
That's an option. Right now, the way it's written, it's completely eliminated under 5 acres. That's an option that the Planning Commission can discuss, maybe a sliding scale on that, as opposed to just eliminating it entirely.
That doesn't necessarily take away their landscape requirements, though, their landscape buffers that they have to have. So it's not just saying they can completely hardscape an entire property. They still have other landscape standards that they would have to meet.
Well, will they conflict with each other, though? If this gets removed and then a landscape plan comes on the other end, do they conflict?
The landscape requirements are just like a setback. So depending on what you're up against, you may have 10-foot landscape buffer versus 15, whatever the length of that property line might be. So it's not percentage based, it's just a solid foot based, depending, for example, if you're on a street side, you have to landscape, let's say 15 feet on that street side back from the property line. Before the building, between the building and the property line, you would have to do 15-foot landscape buffer. We've been changing that up a little bit, so don't quote me on that specific number for every example. But we typically do require that landscape buffer along the property lines. It just changes depending on what's adjacent to it. So it's not going to say that they can just hardscape an entire property and not have anything. But if the commission desires putting a lower percentage in there, that's definitely something we can do.
Another kind of strange thing in the code is that of that 30% of the lot that's provided as usable open space, I believe 30% of that 30% is required to be in the front, adjacent to the street. So if, in the case of 6th Street Lofts, if that wasn't a through lot to 7th Street and they had to put their retention area in the back, they wouldn't have been able to make that requirement of having 30% of that open space being along the street.
So I actually feel like, jumping off of the previous comments, I think maybe that there could be some kind of would it be too complex to have like a trade-off? Say like, okay, you either have to have 20% of usable open space, or you have to have a certain amount in the front. Like, I feel like for some of these small lots, we've all seen it, like sometimes the way they're laid out is just very strange. Mm-hmm. And so I'm sure that for a lot of developers, they hit a wall where it's like, oh, well, we're supposed to have such and such space in the front, but there's like, that doesn't make any sense for this particular lot. So maybe like, I know with our new historical code, like there's like a trade-off option where you can say, and that's obviously at a larger scale, but maybe this could be sort of like this, where we can say, okay, so either you do, I would be open to like 15% usable open space, or you have this much space in the front, and you still have to follow, setbacks in general, but just give them some options so that they can choose what works for their project.
Yes, Vice Chair Maston, that's one of the approaches we're trying to take, is to allow for as much flexibility as possible, realizing that you can't anticipate every single circumstance on all the very strange, small, awkward lots around the old part of the city. So we can take a look at options like that, or just kind of leaving a 10%, 15%, wherever you want to put it on the lot. Might just add some flexibility without completely taking away the open space requirement. Yeah. And in the R4 zone, allow for multiple single-family dwellings rather than specifying just one. And again, just recently we had a zoning ordinance amendment come through, do that exactly for R2 and R3, but not for R4, because that would have permitted basically small manufactured home parks on a particular lot. But we're proposing this language to allow multiple single-family dwellings, but to still require, if you're going to put a manufactured home in the R4 zone, that there would be just one on the lot. And finally, in the I2 zone, remove manufactured home parks and RV parks from the list of permitted uses and add RV parks to conditional uses. This is something that came up with the RV park out at the airport area. In I2, all permitted and conditional uses in the C1 and C2 zone are allowed in the I2 zone, where there might be locations in the I2 zone where those residential uses borderline residential uses in the case of RV parks may not be appropriate next to something that has high impact, high noise, pollution, et cetera. So we thought it might be prudent to make it a conditional use in I2 as well as making consistent with C1 and C2, which has it as a conditional use. So that's the list of the proposals we've got here. We can discuss individual ones more. We just wanted to bring it forward as a discussion item before you as an actual vote. If you'd like, we can bring it next month for an actual vote. And if you've got some specifics for us, like for instance that 10 to 15% open space, we can put that in to the text for purposes of discussion.
You know, the more I think about it, the more I think that 10 to 15 open space should be a sliding scale based on the size of the lot.
Okay.
That's just me. Open the floor to my fellow commissioners. Do you guys have any questions or comments about any of the amendments? Commissioner Garrison?
Thank you. Yeah, a couple. I just really don't like getting rid of that 30% rule. I think it really requires a developer to be creative and come back with a plan that's visually appealing and also is friendly for the applicant that's going to live there, or the person that's going to end up living on that property. If we remove that completely, and I understand about the landscaping buffers and all that, but it feels like what we'll end up getting is a bunch of boxes sitting on a parking lot and very little open space left at the end of the day, because they'll creatively work on eliminating as much of that as possible, because the more under roof you get, the better the project pencils out at the end of the day. So I like having that 30% in there. I like having it a discussion item between this board and the council, also in the applicant, so at least they have to defend their position on why they think they should get rid of something more than 30% of their usable land. And then I'm going to go up a couple lines to the 2.5 story versus 3 story. I don't like that at all, especially when it comes to C1 and CR. I've got the zoning map up on the computer, and I'm looking at our zoning and our C1 areas and our CR areas, and they're specifically right up on Main Street. There's very little that isn't on Main Street, and the thought of allowing a 3-story building by right to go in on Main Street is just not, in my mind, a good trade-off for not having somebody look at it. As long as I've been on this board, and that's only been less than a year at this point, most of our more contentious discussions, and also it was a discussion today on design. When it came to the apartments on 6th Street, we were very much looking at where the 3-story was placed on that property and then in the design, versus just saying it doesn't matter anymore. When it came to the building down here on Main Street, being enlarged from a 2.5 story to a 3-story, that would have taken away that entire discussion. And I think that was the most important part of that whole plan, or at least that project, when it came to this board on what we were looking at, as well as design review. Would a 3-story have fit into that location? And I can't hardly think of a place on Main Street, at least from 89A down to this point, where I'd like to see a 3-story building being allowed by right. I think it really needs to be approved by a board and by a council before it's just blatantly given. So I would be okay with I2, I1, R2, 3, 4, but C1 and CR being right on Main Street, I just don't think it fits in with our current development. And that's all I really have for all that. I think I want to applaud you, and we've been over this a couple times before because you guys have been very aggressive on bringing us more and more revisions to the code, and I really appreciate it. And we've had a lot of discussions lately with the people down in this area on the revisions to the zoning and the way the properties are going to be allowed to be developed, and people are very happy with what they're seeing as being more friendly to allowing them to use their property in a creative way. So I really appreciate that we're getting rid of a lot of this old stuff that probably doesn't matter anymore, but I think some of these things really do matter, and that open space I think is a big consideration. It was a big part of our discussion with the apartments today, and also the height I think is also something that needs to be paid a little more attention to, and I really just hate giving away our ability to chime in on some of these aspects, especially when it comes to some of the more sensitive areas of our town. So those are all my comments. Thank you.
Are there any further commission comments? Commissioner Romeo?
Yeah, I also am not in favor of completely removing the open space, but I do think that perhaps 30% is a bit much on the smaller lots, so maybe some type of 15 to 20, 25% in the sliding scale would be important. And after hearing Commissioner Garrison's comments about the 3 stories with C1 and CR, I would agree with that as well. And I won't say anything about manufactured housing because I actually agree with all of those recommendations.
Commissioner Shreve?
I agree with Commissioner Garrison. I feel like if you open the can of worms and you give out the ability to people to put 3-story buildings up, you can't take it away. And I had some comments about, and I guess I don't understand because I'm new and I haven't done as much research on some of these issues, but if you could explain to me a little bit further about the reduction of minimal lot area per dwelling from 3,750 feet to 2,500. Is that buildable envelope in that lot, the 2,500 number on item number 4?
No,
if you could explain that to me.
That's cut that in half. You can have 1 unit per 3,750 square feet of lot area, which is 2 on 7,500 square feet. So it pertains to the whole lot area. It's a way to express density.
Can I try and chime in on that? So if you were to look at this area, pretty much right behind City Hall, all the way to Riverfront Park and up to Main Street and back down to the river here, the bulk of that area is R2. And when Old Town was originally designed, laid out, it was 2,500 square foot lots. The lots were designed as 25 feet wide by 100 feet deep. So that was just the template that was used. So at 3,750 square feet, you can only put 1 house per every lot and a half. Well, a lot of these lots in the past were two lots per house, but as our densities and our people are trying to create more space and more livable space down here, they're shrinking those lots back and they're putting more units on the lots, which is not allowed under the current code because you can't get the lot size big enough and reduce the lot. It's a catch. So if you go to 2,500 square feet, that's what the bulk of those lots originally were. So if they all go back to the original designation of the original plat that was designed for them, 2,500 square feet would be the typical lot.
Now, could you build a 2-unit, 2-story building on a 2,500 square foot lot in R2? Like a duplex?
No. It's number of dwelling units. It doesn't matter whether they're stacked or side by side.
Okay.
And we had an example of a lot in the 14th Street and Mingus area that was 5,700 square feet. It was 50 by 125 or 115, something like that. It's R3, and they had a plan to put a duplex on it. It fit with the setbacks and everything. The only problem was it wasn't 6,000 square feet because you see in the 5th Fifth bullet point down says in R3 and R4, reduce the minimum lot area from 3,000 square feet to 2,500. That lot is short of 6,000, so it couldn't have 2 units on the lot.
I see.
You would have needed 6,000 square feet to have 2 units on there.
And they missed it by just a couple hundred square feet.
We had to say, sorry, the code won't let you build on a 50 by 115 lot, a duplex in the R3 zone.
Yeah.
Which years ago, that's why it was there, because now people live in much smaller homes, tiny homes, 700 or 800 square foot homes.
We also need more density, right? That's what we think about, is density, is getting more housing within the existing.
Especially in the downtown area where it's so walkable and it just makes sense for it to be more dense. It's just always like one of the things we keep talking about, and we've talked so much about these codes, is like how this is going to look when that density starts filling in, and how that's going to impact the look and feel of the area. We're trying to kind of it's just all that balancing act. Yeah. Well, yeah, there's some special parking laws in the Old Town area that at least have, over the past couple years, allowed us to sometimes kind of, it's not ignore parking, you can never ignore parking, but sort of push it aside a little bit. But yes, like parking is definitely, we just a couple months ago had that, there was a proposal that unfortunately was denied. They didn't bring enough, evidence is the wrong word. They didn't make a good enough argument. But also community members were very concerned about parking, and it was just down the street from this building, which is all kind of the same area when it comes down to parking because it's so tight.
Vice Chair Maston, Commission, I'm going to go back real quick to the 30% open space.
Thank you.
Something to consider that we might be able to look into is, because it sounds like we're getting a little bit mixed opinion on that. We could look at keeping it, but also allowing the commission to waive it if the conditions warrant.
That could be good.
Yeah.
For the site plan.
Yeah.
Correct.
As
The
part
site
of,
plan is conducive and shows, I mean, I think about people with dogs, and they got a place to walk the dog. If you have 4 units in this tiny little, maybe it's a 2 or 3 acre thing, and you got 10 units on it, but you have to have a place to walk dogs.
And I think the ability for us to have a voice in that is the important piece. When it makes sense, we can waive it. A nice compromise.
and as we said, they would have to come through design review anyway. That could be a function of design review to, for them to request and you to possibly grant a waiver of that requirement. Again, we might consider going smaller than 20% or smaller than 30% on some of the really, really small lots, and then allowing
Yeah.
relief from there. So maybe a little combination. We'll put some numbers like that in and give you some options.
I do want to also go back to that 3-story thing. I know I am a little bit at odds with some of my fellow commissioners. I am typically pretty pro-density. I wonder if there's some way that we could, or the city could, regulate massing for taller buildings, because I know that part of the concern with 3-story buildings is actually how they're massed. Like, do you have a monolithic wall on Main Street that goes up 3 stories, like a rectangle, like New York or something? Or do you have, massing that sets back as it goes up, and like only a certain amount of the building mass can actually hit that tallest height? And I think that that is a really good way to bring in human scale and take care of some of the things that people are concerned about, especially like stuff like the view and keeping the small town feel. And I wonder if maybe that could be like a happy medium there. Like maybe we allow people to go that tall, but only so much mass. Because that's really what the project we saw today did well. They didn't have all their mass going straight up. They, elegantly distributed it so that they got the use that they needed, and we got a project that looks in keeping with the surrounding.
Yes, Vice Chair, I think that might be an opportunity as well to maybe think about adding that as something that could be waived or modified during the design review process rather than trying to come up with a formula for
Okay.
mass that's going to apply to every property in the city.
What, you don't want to have really fancy spreadsheets? Yeah.
So I'll chime in. I think that's exactly what we have now, though, is we have that ability to be that voice on how that's designed and laid out. And the apartments on 6th were a perfect example of that. Is there was some complaining from the community about 3-story. Well, there's a 3-story a couple blocks away, you know, and the hospital's 4-story, and it's another block away. And so, you know, I think it would fit in where it fits in. And I think having the voice to continue to say where we think that does and doesn't fit in is important. And so I think leaving it alone really allows us to continue to have that voice. Anything else is just going to create a really probably difficult paragraph for a developer as well as a applicant to try and figure out what it means, you know. So like I said, I'm looking at the zoning map. I'm good with 3-story in most of those places except for C1 and C2, which are right down our primary corridor.
All right, I can get behind that. I was just thinking about like trying to make it look more developer friendly, because I know that that's part of the game too, is just making so when developers take a first look, they're like, oh yeah, this looks easy. I think I can get my project in, as opposed to being like, oh, this looks too hard. I'm going to go to Clarkdale. I mean, yeah.
So does that leave it where you do allow it in R2, R3, R4? So you could leave that there and then you create a new amendment for CR, C1 and CR that allow it with conditional use?
I think you just remove them, because then it's already set up to be conditional use. Well, you could just remove them from the amendment altogether, because right now they need to get, yeah.
That was why I came forward.
Yeah.
Either conditional use or waive as part of the design review process.
Yeah, that,
Still
exactly.
get half a dozen to one, you know. But that doesn't require them to go through the conditional use permit process. That's just part of their design review.
Does everyone feel good about that? I feel good about that. Okay.
The difference, though, is that a conditional use permit process does notify all the owners within 300 feet, and a design review does not. It's not a publicly noticed action.
I mean, in truth, we got 2 letters tonight from an entire community. How often, I want the community to be as informed as possible. I always want the community to have every opportunity to make comment, but like realistically, I feel like the people, if they do want to make a comment, they'll come anyway because they'll be paying attention. I don't know that it will functionally make a difference in how many comments we get.
I think, Vice Chair, the location of the project will have a big influence on how many comments you get. This particular project tonight was not anywhere near a single-family residential zone. If this same 3 acres was, say, at 16th Street and Elm, in that area down there, we would probably get a number of comments on it. So that's the difference to keep in mind between the design review, which is almost not administrative because it's still something that the Planning Commission needs to decide on. But if you want to involve the public to the greatest extent, it will remain as a conditional use permit.
Okay.
But on the other hand, that creates more uncertainty on the part of the developer, who says, oh, this is going to be hard if I've got to go through a conditional use permit. So that's something to weigh.
We could also address it by acreage too. Put a couple, instead of it being broad, 5 acres or smaller.
Because you can assume that more acreage means fewer neighbors.
Actually, I just mixed the 2 together. What I meant, you were talking about the 3-story.
Oh.
You're going to have to 3-story in the different zonings. I guess I was bouncing back to the 5 acres or smaller. You could say 1 to 3 acres or 1 to 2 acres, 2 to 5, and then 5 and over. I don't mean to talk about 2 different things at the same time. I apologize.
It all kind of gets... because it ends up impacting developments altogether, even though it's a list item for us. And obviously, the staff has to figure that out, which is very hard.
Scott, I had a question for you. You were saying how setbacks create landscape, right? Setbacks actually create a certain amount of percentage of landscape. Well, there's going to be a point where the setback is a percentage of the lot. And as the lot gets bigger, that percentage gets smaller, right?
Right.
So if it's a small lot and you still have 30%, it might just be the setbacks. You know what I'm saying? There's a certain size lot where the setbacks end up being at least 30% of the whole lot.
That would be
Right.
a really small lot, but yes.
Right.
I see where you're going with that, yeah. Because on most streets, the landscape yard is 10 feet from the sidewalk. On major arterials, it's 15 feet. But that's just on street frontages. That's not in the rear, that's not on the sides.
Not on the side or the
Yeah.
back, just only in front.
Yep.
But as I mentioned earlier, if we look at possibly leaving the 30% and giving the commission the option to reduce that if warranted, that might
Yeah.
take care of any of those potential issues.
Based on whether the commission
Yeah.
approves the site.
We just waive it if the site plan is good enough. It also, I think, helps inspire developers to come in with more developed site plans, because occasionally we'll get things that are real rough. And it's always helpful, since our job is really making sure that we are ensuring the continued safety and positive place in the community, having everything look nice and be nice to live. It's hard to make decisions for that goal when there's no solid site plan. So I think anything that encourages them showing us a little bit, plans that are a little bit further along is good.
Okay.
I think that does, so it seems like we are asking to get rid of C1 and CR.
From the three-story
Yeah,
allowance?
from 1, 2, 3, I've got to count, 4, it's like 7.
Right.
Yeah, and then for the, I'm going back up, for 8? 8, oh.
Yeah, that's 30%.
Yeah, and then changing that to being something that the commission can waive.
That gives us plenty to go on.
Yeah, or reduce.
Yeah,
Sounds
it shouldn't be a yes or no, it should be
Right.
30, or you have to do 20 based on your site plan, or 10, and your number of units.
Yeah, so we'll just set that up. And then I think setting that up, I think you made a really good point about the conditional use permit allowing for public comment.
And that might be more of a issue, Vice Chair, on height
On the height,
rather than.
that's what everyone comments on.
The open space, because if you're a neighbor, you don't care that much about the open space, but you might care about the height.
Yeah. And I always want the public to feel like they do have an impact, because they do, when they share their opinions. So I don't want to cut the public out. I just also want to not scare away developers, so.
I can tell you this, any builder's gonna go up 3 stories, any opportunity he or she can. Because it's a lot cheaper to build up than it is to build out.
That's how we get density.
And that does help make for usable open space on the ground. I personally would rather developers go up a little bit, not crazy, and have trees and landscaping. Go ahead, Commissioner Kling.
I wanted to add on that. I think I already am familiar with the Optima in Carolyn. It's a building in Scottsdale, and I'm not saying at a high rise down here, but they have these planter boxes that go around the whole perimeter of the property, and they're beautiful. They're succulents. If you were to do something like that, adding the landscaping to the building, none of us want to see a concrete jungle. They're very visually appealing, high demand, where you could go up, 2, 3 stories. Obviously, 1.3 at a minimum, but And then still have room around the perimeter for walkable space. Or the rooftop gardens, you know. A lot can be done with those. Urban gardens, you know, some of that's roofing, which it's a special thing to approve, but there's a lot of ways you can add green space without it being trees, without it being,
Grass.
you know.
To get back to Garrison's thing about the water.
And I agree with you that gives the developer room to be creative, but it doesn't have to be your typical, you know, on the ground. That can be space that, you know, is maybe walkable, but
Maybe by waiver, built space could count for usable open space, depending on how it's developed. I can definitely imagine developments where someone could create a second story, like parks, like tiny, you know, planted area. I've seen things like that. You know, I think we've all seen green roofs and green walls, but there's also usable green spaces that you can build. And I think things like that would be popular in Cottonwood. We might, you know, get a little bit of opposition in the beginning because people maybe don't understand it, but I think built, people would enjoy it.
you have to be careful with building materials because
Yeah.
some of that is not sustainable. I mean, you can't be adding water to, you know, the walls.
But
it
succulents
is-
and, yeah.
There is a way to do it that it's very visually appealing. I mean, it's happening. No, we're not going to put a high rise here like Optima, but they've rebuilt 3 or 4 of them now down there. The Biltmore, Carolyn also.
And an option to waive our definition of buildable or usable open space may allow for open space that doesn't necessarily fit that definition, so
Yeah.
you don't have 30% of the
Yeah, it's
what
not
we would call
necessarily on
open
the
space.
ground. Yeah.
Right, so that gives the commission a lot more flexibility to approve something like that.
Yeah. I'd like to open Cottonwood up to more like innovative building techniques and materials and ways to, you know, program space for people.
We're ripe for it here in the Verde Valley, like compared to the others now, so absolutely.
Very good.
All right. Thank you guys so much.
Motion to
Wait,
adjourn.
what, more?
Well, it's 7, so I don't want to skip 7.
Oh,
If you were getting ready to adjourn.
I was. I closed all my stuff.
So it's suggested topics for future meetings, and one item that keeps coming up, and I really would love to see us have a discussion about it, is I got to go to, and we had 2 projects today that every time we get a project coming through, I continue to see the ability to use this concept in a sustainable way, and it's never part of the discussion because we have all these guidelines on what is a parking lot and what is usable area on commercial development specifically. I got to go to a presentation down in Tucson a few years back, and they were trying to figure out how to redevelop a downtown area. And the area had been kind of like Old Town was back in its day, and it had been prosperous, and then it just became an area of old concrete buildings and sidewalk and no landscaping. Everything was dead, and most of the businesses had left, and most of the buildings were empty, and it was just a fairly large area of blight, not because the buildings were decrepit to the point that they were falling in, but there was nobody using them, nobody maintaining them, nobody wanting to be in that area. And Tucson had taken a proactive stance on trying to create more green space and more islands of growth and get rid of their concrete jungle, so to say, as the discussion was earlier. And so what they did is they came up with a whole new way of looking at how they were doing their parking lots and their sidewalks. And instead of, like we were looking at the Citizen, the gas company drawings and their development proposal, if you looked at the landscaping and the way the parking lot was designed, and if you drive around any of our shopping centers, anything in town, all of our landscape areas are above the parking lot. And what Tucson did was they kind of flipped it on its lid, and they started putting all their landscaping in depressed areas, and they started using their parking lots as restrictions of flow in times of rain. And so what it was doing is basically they were capturing the rain that was landing on the lot, they were directing it to the low spots, which happened to be all of their landscaping, and they used that rain to provide sustainable water use for the plants, which meant that the homeowner or the property owner or the renter didn't have to put that much more effort and maintenance into having these green spaces. And they showed it, that area of town, and it was completely revamped by bringing in green. And it was done in a way that didn't create any more water use. It just had to be a way of going in and thinking about the way you have drainage and flow off of your properties into the streets. And so instead of shedding all that water onto the city streets or the city's sanitary sewer system, you were keeping as much of it on site and using it for the sustenance and maintenance of the plantings and the landscape. And so every time we see one of these proposals, I keep going, there's another lost opportunity to do something that would be much better for our water table, much better for our green space, add more landscaping in areas where we'd really love to see it, and not really at the end of the day cost the developer or the city or the renter any more money to maintain that space than if they just left it a pavement parking lot and a sidewalk. So I'd love to have a conversation about looking at how we require parking lots and landscaping on some of our larger developments.
Commissioner Garrison, Vice Chair Maston, if you can provide us with the contact information for who you met with in Tucson,
I can do that.
Where was that area? Was it on Broadway?
It was a downtown area, and it's a triangular shaped area. Anyway, outside I'll get that information. I'll get you the proposal for the green space.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Yes. Meeting adjourned, or motion seconded, meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Gavel.